First of all, I wanted to see how many archivists, librarians, collection managers, museum curators are here today. Yay, awesome. So I'm going to start off, I'm saying that because I'm going to start off with briefly touching on terms that we use in libraries and special collections for everyone who's like really not familiar. And it's pretty much like kind of a structural kind of terms that we use, and I'm going to tell you this because like when I'm like describing things that we have in our collections, we like kind of overlap terms a lot. So like papers, collections, repositories, like sometimes those will get used in different contexts. But it's also an interesting thing to think about. So pay attention, to the context, because the terms are used to conceptualize hierarchies that take the physical and hypothetical representation of containers, sometimes families. So there's relationships within these files, and even they'll branch out and have like branching systems. So some terms that we use in academia to describe collection acquisition, storage, various types of access to information holdings, and types of information formats can overlap and sound redundant, like I just said. For example, I'm an archivist who's also a type of librarian, and sometimes I tell people that I'm a librarian because I also am a librarian. And then, of course, I get the question, do you shelve books all day? Do you wear cardigans? And yeah, I do. I actually, just one of those, I wear cardigans every day because we like to keep our storages like cold. So yeah, I spend most of my time at Newcomb. I'll tell you a little bit about what I do to give you some context as to why I'm interested in this subject of colonial residues and neoliberal agendas that affect my collection. So I spend most of my time managing Newcomb's collection by creating and executing processing projects for new backlog holdings. So those are donations or materials that we have that have not been made accessible yet. And I also train and manage student workers. My student workers, I mentor them a lot. A lot of times I don't really like to call them my student workers. And a lot of times I've had student workers who become really interested in becoming like memory keepers and archivists, or working with like cultural collections. So I also monitor and deal and manage the archive's physical storage environment and operation. And another thing I do is when I'm doing collection management stuff, I try to connect the dots with collections in order to, like, our real goal is to like provide access. So I try to solve problems with descriptions in our inventory to improve tangibility of ephemeral materials. So, my processing is also a way to stabilize the material. And sometimes stabilization is better if the thing is digitized. So because of that, I also manage our digital initiatives and our digital preservation. And sometimes that's really difficult to do because I don't know if you all have a problem with this, but sometimes campus IT is not very helpful, especially when you're storing digital assets of like heritage materials. And I also prioritize my own professional development so that I can stay up to date with past and current trends in material culture and various subjects of disciplines associated with our collections. So with our collections, it's going to be second wave feminism. It's going to be women in higher education in Louisiana. It's going to be DIY feminism materials, gender and sexuality studies, gender equity, public health, social justice, so things like that. And those are all subjects that kind of make up sources, donors, agents in our collections. So they either worked with, they taught, or were students of, or were activists in. And when I have time, when I'm done with all my collection management stuff, I really try to use my professional development to develop programming and help the head of archives create programming that will help to activate the archive, encourage more community interaction and utilize creativity and DIY as a tool for creating culture and sharing information. So that's what I do as an archivist. And sometimes folks don't know why I'm like talking about decolonizing stuff, because they're like, you're just, somebody who processes papers. And I'm like, well, yes, but I think being a librarian and archivist is a very special role that someone can have, where you have, the ability to take little steps to make changes. So that being said, the term archive refers to not only the building where we house our materials, but also its content. Our entire physical content can be referred to also as a repository. And our building, in turn, can also be referred to as a repository. Our digital assets are stored in a digital repository. And guess what? Our digital repository, we also call our digital library sometimes. But we do not call our digital library our repository sometimes. Archival content can be described as records, materials, items, resources, holdings, collections, papers, files, assets. And this gets really, confusing sometimes for folks who are not familiar with special collections. For example, we provide access to legacy materials that document the history of Newcomb College, Tulane's coordinate women's college. These resources consist of record collections, the personal papers of students and faculty, collections of books, audiovisual materials, scrapbooks, vertical files on subjects, and 2D and 3D items, which for Newcomb Archives collection is pretty much our memorabilia collection. So that's just one collection, one giant collective of materials. And to confuse you even more, we have several collections in our holdings. And we have another major collection called the Voorhoff Collection, which consists of a non-circulating special collection library devoted to women's education and prescriptive literature. That one has culinary history, Newcomb authors, gender and sexuality, third wave feminist zines, and other topics. One really important analogy that I think some old-fashioned librarians and archivists don't understand about special collections is that, the collections that you manage are all different, whether it's the entire repository or if it's individual collections within the repository. And so, a one-size-fit-all like standardization cannot work for everything in an archive. A lot of us like to think of an archive as like an organism that needs room to grow and change and evolve. So it doesn't always have to stay the same. But, sometimes folks think that standardization and keeping things the same is like how you like keep things orderly. And at one point they thought that was a way to make it more interoperable with different types of linked data. So like a living organism, the collection needs to be weeded and purged, pruned, and we also need to, house it and nourish it. So we take care of it that way. And at Newcomb Archives, we consider ourselves like caretakers of collections. So as far as colonial residue, this is traces of the legacy systems of oppression found in acquisitions, organization, access, and description. So from a historic perspective, archives and special collection repositories in North America preserve and provide access to materials that seem to perpetually dehumanize human subjects and their cultures. And sometimes, like I said, that kind of outdated way of standardizing things, kind of perpetuates this. And sometimes, librarians or catalogers or archivists, people creating metadata don't realize, the harm in some of these like legacy descriptions or legacy ways of legacy record keeping. So traces of this colonial and imperialistic style of information management exist in most, if not all, cultural repositories. And I'm specifically referring to our collections in North America and the United States. So from those, you can find legacy collections coming from state archives, church records, university holdings, business archives even, and museums, and, probably other types of like colonial entities that were started, a long time ago. So in these legacy collections, we see subjects as agents who belong to, ruling. So there's different, roles of agents in our collections, and agents are usually like entities or people or families. But that's another thing I forgot to mention. We also call agents subjects. So if you're confused, just let me know. But yeah, these range from so they consist of subjects, agents who belong to the ruling elite. Their subordinates, which can range from regular citizens to others who might have been enslaved individuals and designated as property or livestock for service. So, some of these legacy records document instances of, assets. And when you're talking about assets, you're talking about, what you own, or who, and, sometimes it also documents people from lower statuses. So this residue permeates and stains not only content of records that document stories of our country's origins, but also document a practice where oppressive hierarchies and their descriptors are access points within the aggregate. So, the things that people use to describe, these harmful descriptions that people are using putting into their inventories and using in their metadata, these are access points now. And because they're access points, sometimes, that doesn't really make people who might have, people of color or people from other, ethnicities or cultures, it might not be really awesome to see some of these descriptions. And when you do that, you don't really create an inclusive space. So from this, it's kind of a white supremacist kind of perspective. So stories and identities of people of color and people who were underrepresented and marginalized, if not imprisoned, enslaved, or silenced, are inaccurately represented. In contrast, contemporary archives created or managed within a feminist framework and ethic of care approach have proven to be successful, reparative, inclusive, diverse, and progressive spaces. So when I say contemporary archives, ones that were maybe put together or an initiative was created, later on, like, Newcomb Archives, actually Newcomb, the Voorhoffs, Newcomb Archives was created like 1987, 1988. And this is a special case because it was created by, a women's center. So a lot of second wave feminists. So that being said, you have to kind of question our legacy collections in the United States and, these legacy collections that can be found in local libraries, archives, museums, and ask, who are these originally created for? And what are their original intentions? There needs to be a transparency and acknowledgement regarding the origin of some of our major cultural heritage repositories. And that being said, it's like, we don't have our history includes slavery and a lot of other things. So, these things are in the archives or in museums. And, this is where, repairing comes in. And, you may ask, well, what's an example of things in legacy collections that are problems? Well, inaccurate descriptions of human subjects and their cultures due to an Eurocentric or Anglo points of view. For example, record and knowledge creators outside of underrepresented, marginalized, oppressed communities, creating descriptions and standards without reaching out into communities or subject experts. And also who do not, they don't rely on subjects within their collection or subjects who are, alive to self-describe. So sometimes, catalogers or, people who are memory keeping might get excited that they recognize something and just go with it without actually doing research. And that's, that's not, sometimes it's not harm is not intended, but sometimes that's just a style, that's just what happens. When I was early in my career, doing metadata, I too, was just oh my gosh, this makes sense, but then when you have to do research on it, it's oh wait, I should rely on, experts or communities to really define that or make sure I'm saying, describing it the right way. So, and saying that, I'm talking about like, also excitement about RDA, also Library of Congress subject headings or their linked data, and also linked data created by wikis. In progressive archival, for progressive archivists, these type of things are now like, we're really kind of looking at them on how accurate their descriptions are, their vocabularies, their controlled vocabularies are. Because, like I said, people who get excited about entering in descriptions didn't check or didn't make sure that that was okay to use. Yeah, like Library of Congress has, you can look through there, and there are things in the Library of Congress linked data that if you actually do the research and you look at the community and you ask people, it's not cool. And it's not accurate. So, this offensive use of descriptions can also be considered, it's not just offensive, it's like inaccurate then. And, if you're talking about data or, information, like you don't really want to use inaccurate information. And, this linked data, metadata, linked data, it's supposed to be, it's gotten really wild because of advancement in like technologies, when originally, your cataloging is like your machine readable, but because of the internet, linked data is a huge thing. It's like, let's link every piece of data that we can get our hands on. And, without any concern of like, oh, is this a dead name? Oh, is this the right name? Is this the right, term for this person's culture? So, problems with standardization of vocabulary and taxonomy can manifest in ways that are dehumanizing, offensive, insensitive, unethical. Like one example is, there was one instance where for an enslaved person's individual authority name file, instead of, usually like if you have like, Abraham Lincoln, it's going to have his birth date and his death date, comma, birth date, death date within his name authority record. And, for this one subject, it was, since they were an enslaved individual, it was their purchase date. So, just little things like that, like probably not good. And then again, linking or using dead names. Actually, as far as, the U.S. is concerned, like as a cataloger, you really shouldn't be putting more information into your record than is in the cover of the book where the Library of Congress info is. And, sometimes like people go on like an investigation to get as much information as they can about a creator. Another thing in legacy collections are scientific and paternalistic racism with regards to cultural objects and human remains. And, these are really fun. I had fun like looking at, cultural objects when I was a kid, but then once you, grow up and stuff, if you look at it, those collections are really desensitizing to patrons. And, it's desensitizing to the dehumanization and the disrespect of humans outside of colonial culture. Basically treating cultural objects and human remains as, educational props. Is it okay to look at a human skull like and think, oh, it's like a rock or it's part of geology? Or, are, indigenous cultures, are they part of the flora culture? These are problems in how cultural objects are sometimes treated. And, another thing, so this is the paternalistic racism where cultures outside of colonial rule, even though they are creators of these now commodified objects, because, these things also become very commodified, so the people who created them are now also incapable and lack sophistication to care and possess their own cultural objects. And, with that too, you have to think some of these cultural objects that are being held are, were not meant to be saved. Some of them are ephemeral or meant to be ephemeral. And, but, also they're also a commodity. So anyhow, all of that being said, And that's, like my library career. This is like what I've discovered in my library career over, I don't know, like maybe 9 years. And, from that time, I've noticed that there are a lot of initiatives currently with progressive archivists and librarians, progressive archivists, initiatives to repair descriptions so they're more inclusive, ethical, and reparative. However, that's one example, but that doesn't mean that, people who are interested in this initiative are changing all the descriptions, because the legacy descriptions are now access points. So you have to carefully change them or create crosswalks. And also, if you can't, if the thing is called an offensive thing, you can't just change the name of the pamphlet. So you have to include, harmful content warnings in your collection record. But yeah, so that's one way of creating crosswalks. And also, like right now, I'm in an initiative with Tulane University Special Collections. We're working on an inclusive and reparative description manual that will help, and it's specifically geared towards it's geared towards Newcomb or, collections on campus. But yeah, so the point isn't to just change everything so that access is lost or censor things, because, these materials are also like evidence of things that happened. And, censoring we don't want to clean what happened. We want people to be aware that it's just, this is the deal. Also there's a lot of community creating vocabulary, like controlled vocabulary guides and manuals. And then also within your, whenever you're making a change in a record or creating a warning, keeping track of like versions of when the documents or when records were updated. But unfortunately, we're not done with our IR reparative manual. It's an ongoing thing. It started in the pandemic. But, from doing that, from even just doing the initiative of creating the manual, we, like, as a group, we have really, for 3 years now, we've been, like, almost teaching ourselves, like, new descriptions on things, finding new resources. And then, in a lot of collections and a lot of archivists I know, we've been prioritizing projects aimed at identifying collections with marginalized and underrepresented subjects and creating access to them using the current IR description guidelines. So, just because we make an IR description manual doesn't mean we're not also like cross-checking with other ones, especially if the subject is overlapped with, what they're talking about. And then also, updating collection development priorities to be more inclusive and diverse. And in doing that, we have to create and promote library and archival spaces that are more accessible, inclusive, safe, and private. So, now with all like the description problems I just mentioned, repairing that is a big thing, because you can't have an inclusive and safe space for someone if the descriptions of your materials are offensive, don't, reflect on them correctly, or, you don't have materials in the collection that even like deal with them. And that even goes into like, who you're hiring to represent your, to work in your library or archive. And at Newcomb, we've like done tiny little steps. They're not really big, but they're actually really big compared to the main library. We've done away with asking, for official identification. And, like main library and other libraries are like, what? And I'm like, hey, nobody's running out of here with like a letter from Harriet Johr. Like no one's doing it. We really don't have anything in our collection that I think that somebody would try to like sell or, also, if you emailed us and we gave you the stuff, we know how to find you. And then also people are like, well, aren't you afraid people are going to steal your zines? And we're like, well, we usually have like 2. We usually kept 2, or we kept backups. And, we really believe in like not, but, we're also like a very like feminist kind of centered, focused collection. So, we're not really concerned about like incriminating people before they even do anything. But, we totally understand that, like other libraries and museums and archives need to have like some type of, way to keep track of who's using their materials and who used a collection. We also don't have video surveillance in our reading room. We don't have video surveillance in our reading room. We keep it open for open study for everybody who comes in from 10 to 4 p.m. on Monday through Thursday. So while people are in the reading room, they're allowed to just, study and do whatever they want, quietly, of course. Not allowed to bring soup in our reading room, or somebody left some bananas on our table once. So yeah, no food in there, but for people who want to access or use our collections, they usually make an appointment and we'll bring the stuff within 24 hours. But, we live in New Orleans, so sometimes, if there's like a 3-day rain, which hasn't happened in a while, then that could be a problem. But we try to make access to the collections outside of the hours by appointment, in case there's somebody who couldn't make it because they had to work during regular working hours. Also, another thing we really try to do is respect the privacy of donors and subjects, especially those who might be harmfully affected by, inaccurate descriptions or linking, data to them. So, like, for example, we follow an ethical zine cataloging, which actually you can find that. I'll find the link and make sure you all get it. But there's a link to a zine about ethical cataloging of zines. Very meta. Again, we only use information found on zines. We do not over-describe, and we don't cyber-stalk our creators. So if your name is Pretty Kitty on the zine, that is what your name is going to be as a creator, unless you tell us to link it or unless you have made yourself very public. And for, LGBTQ plus folks, we only use information we find when reviewing and processing the collection and, from the source or the creator. And we try not to interpret or correct identifying content. And then one thing that a lot of folks don't really think about is, considering, the advancement in information and, sharing via the internet, at Newcomb, we try to do our best to seek consents for subjects in our collection, if we can find them, who have agreed to be filmed or recorded before the internet was a standard form of communication. So we also are big on having getting another consent after, to make sure they're okay with, hey, I know you were filmed in the 90s, but are you okay with us publishing this in 2023? I would not want anybody to publish anything that I did in 1990 just because I was like a teenager or whatever and signed a waiver. So I rambled on about what progressive archivists and librarians have been doing over the past 10 years to clean up colonial residues left by legacy collections and the continuation of legacy record keeping due to lack of diversity in the archives and library profession. And I think so far it's been going really awesome with the repair. However, within my micro level view of the profession at Tulane, I've seen repositories on campus cut back on gatekeeping of the profession. So now we have we have more diverse faculty and staff and student workers. who are now in special collections and the main library. So, and as you can see here, I can see special collections and the main library from my reading room. So yeah, so out of my window, like I've been watching all of it, but yeah, so far it looks really great. But while this progress is happening and I'm like collaborating with people, I'm like, wait, something's going on with our collection. And our collection is different. And as far as like reparative descriptions, our collection is very low maintenance when it comes to unethical descriptions. And it's because, the collection was created by women, pretty much. And, Newcomb Archives in Voorhof was created in 1988. The initiative was to preserve and create access to this legacy collection of Newcomb College, which was Tulane's coordinate women's university. It was a Victorian art school. It was degree granting for a very long time. And then Title IX happened. The archives was created through a grant in 1987, specifically, going, hey, we need to like preserve this activity, this proto-feminist activity that happened, starting, in the late 1800s. And they got the grant, and from that grant, they were able to have another initiative, which was to start collecting and preserving and creating knowledge about women in the Gulf South. And, this project grew into an initiative that, actually there's a really awesome book we also have her papers, Janet Allerud. She's a second wave feminist, and she wrote a book, about remapping second wave feminists in the Gulf South. And one cool thing about our collection is another giant collective collection we have is a collection that is pretty much framed by her book. So we have tons of everybody who's in this book, we have like their collection. So about the neoliberal agenda in academic culture and what's affecting our collection is, pretty much we had this collection in Newcomb Archives. We had this collection that back in its heyday was very active, and everybody were attached to an institute. Everybody was created things about it, programming. The archives was a very big part of it was a women's center at that time. The archives was a huge part of that, the culture of that center. And while they were creating programming and they were collecting things, that automatically went into the archives. And yes, they were using, people were accessing, the legacy materials from Newcomb College, but it wasn't really like, that was kind of like what they used for branding. But ultimately, they collected so much stuff. They had like a Zale Kemmerling programming, but it seemed, like when you look at the papers and stuff, it seemed very like kind of grassroots and more community oriented and more cozy. And now, now the collection, the way we're collecting things now is kind of strange, especially because, the collection before had relied on Newcomb alumni. And, a lot of Newcomb alumni are from the past who are now donating their stuff because they're older and they're like in their 70s or 80s. A lot of those collections are of, white women of a specific class. So that's like what our collection, we're collecting things from that. We're also still collecting from second wave feminists because they are older and they're ready, they meet with us or they want to give us their collections and they want to make sure that their research goes somewhere when they die. I know that's morbid, but literally that's what's up. And so, we're always thinking like, well, what about the future? Like, where are we going with our collection development now in the future? And so it's kind of difficult because the Institute now doesn't really rely on the archives the way it used to. And, now there's a whole thing with like publishing. There's, you know, there's a problem also in how, like, academic culture is managed in a neoliberal way. And, you know, this is like extreme commodification of information. So in order for you to actually even be given, you know, there's no karaoke anymore. Like, if you're going to get on the karaoke stage, you have to be able to sing really, really, really well, like in an analogy. But, you know, that doesn't really, you can't really collect culture that way. And so with this, you know, this kind of neoliberal management style that's everywhere on campus, you have like exploitation of the individual, right? You have this thing where it's like, you know, individuals, the agenda is to profit and brand yourself in order to be visible and compete and be the most useful. And then, you know, from the university or the big corporate entity side is, you know, it's a profit machine, whether it's education or not, it's a profit machine. And the encouragement is, they use individualism as encouragement, you know, and they create consumer communities. And they don't say they're consumer communities, but it's a consumer community. And there has been a change in feminist roles within academia due to extreme commodification of information, which I said, you know, with the publishing. And, you know, a lot of this, when you are really, you know, you're trying to get a bunch of individuals to look like they're in a community, you know, what happens is you have a lot of siloed teamwork. And all of that, you know, kind of, like I said, it creates this, it depletes authentic community. And so, you know, the community seems kind of, empty. And then also, you know, what's really popular is like kind of status quo programming that's really super branded. And then, of course, you know, idolization of elitism through like publishing, but also through like, you know, legacy associations. And, you know, none of this is bad. It's just bad if it's like unbalanced. And, you know, also in our collection specifically, you know, this change in relationship and purpose of the archives, no longer a catalyst, but, you know, now kind of like a really passive collection that's brought out as, you know, kind of a specimen. And then also, you know, if you think about it, right now at at Tulane and, you know, at Newcomb Institute, we have the most diverse staff, the most diverse undergraduate scholars, and the most diverse faculty that probably ever was. And yet, as far as our internal archiving, they have kind of streamlined institutional repository. So no one's really archiving our activity. And it's really difficult because, you know, no one's sending us their papers. And you know, and so that's kind of upsetting that there's no cultural paper trail anywhere, especially since most things are digital now. And, you know, the younger generation, this generation that is extremely diverse right now, they're very young. And, you know, people's relationship with their undergraduate alma mater may not be as powerful as it was back in like the 50s or 60s or 70s. And so you have students who might be, you know, more excited about where they got their MF or their master's degree or their doctorate. So, and then you have to think, you know, if we're relying on alumni to donate things, then, you know, we're also not going to see these papers until they're elderly. So that's another problem with our collection development. So, you know, back to the beginning, how are we fixing this? We're fixing this by, you know, what I said, developing programming that will activate the archive, encourage community and interaction, and utilize creativity. And DIY is a tool for creating culture and sharing information. And we're doing this by partnering with like-minded initiatives, for example, Future Natures. But we also try to sign up and volunteer in our region, with Documenting the Now as regional archivists. However, a lot of times people don't know what archivists do, and they still don't know that they can contact us to help them with their community collections. And our initiative is to, if someone did come with us with a community collection, especially from a marginalized and underrepresented group, we're happy to train, help with digitization, supplies, storage, and inventory. We also like to stay in communication with our living subjects and our communities who donate things, especially even if we have their collections already. But we definitely stay in touch with them a lot to make sure, everything is cool with what we have. And sometimes, people want things back, and we're totally cool with giving them their stuff back. And since Roe versus Wade was overturned, we have been developing more programming that promotes information sharing and cultural creation through analog formats like DIY feminism. And so this slide here, also our reading room, but this is our crafternoon that we did after the Roe versus Wade. And this, this happened because when Roe versus Wade happened, a lot of people didn't understand, it was weird how email went completely silent because folks didn't know what they were allowed to share electronically. So we decided to put up a crafternoon so that people could just craft and maybe, have a safe place to talk about their feelings about it. And we try to do a crafternoon here and there, and it's turned into doing DIY feminism workshops. And, if you don't know what DIY feminism materials are, it's we refer to it to zines, artist books, prints, independent feminist films, but also if you look outside of, our subject matter, it's also anything DIY, lo-fi, production, stuff like that, comic books, happenings, protests, stuff like that. Anything that's not mainstream. But yeah, so that's what we're trying to do. And yeah, that's it.